Sam Houston lived with the Cherokee Indians twice in his life. He was a wonderful advocate and friend of the Native Americans, and not just the Cherokee, but the Osage, the Creek, at a time where a lot of people in society thought Native Americans were savages. He actually lived with the Cherokee twice in his life. Once when he was a teenager. He ran away from home. He didn't want to work the family store. He didn't want to go to school. He was, for all intents and purposes, a C student. And he ran away from home to live with the Cherokee Indians. The wild life of the Cherokee intrigued him, and he found a kindred spirit with the Native Americans. He loved their culture, he loved their educational system, he loved their political system, and these attributes imprinted on him through the rest of his life.
Now the chief behind you, can you give me a little bit of information about who he is and how he connects to Sam Houston?
When Sam Houston was young and he visited the Cherokee for the first time, he caught the eye of Chief Ulateka, who was the chief of the western band of the Cherokee. And Sam was eventually adopted into the tribe, and Ulateka became his adopted Cherokee father. And after living with the Cherokee as a teenager, he realized that he had to do something more than just be with the Cherokee. He had to actually go back home and help his mom and pay off the debts that he had taken from the family store. So he taught school. For one full year, he actually taught school, and he thought that out of all of the offices and honors that I have had, none more suited me with the highest sense of satisfaction than when I taught school for 1 year. And he said that at the latter part of his life. But education aside, he went to go live with the Cherokee Indians for a second time after he quit his job as governor of Tennessee, and he divorced his wife, which in the early 19th century was a social no-no. So he went to go live with the Cherokee again, and his adopted Cherokee father, Chief Ulateka, welcomed him back into the tribe. He said, my wigwam is yours, my home is yours, my people are yours, come rest with us. And that's exactly what he did.
Now part of the collection here includes an interesting document that certifies Sam Houston, so to speak, as a Cherokee. Can you explain that?
The second time that Sam Houston went to go live with the Cherokee Indians, from 1829 to 1832, Sam Houston was formally admitted as a citizen into the Cherokee Nation. And that document there in 1829 and 1830, 1831, 1832 certified Sam as a member of the Cherokee Tribe with all rights and privileges, with voting privileges for their politics and the ability to be an advocate for them, because of course at this point in time, Sam Houston was still active in politics, even though he was no longer governor of Tennessee, even though he had one foot in the Oval Office, being friends with Andrew Jackson, who is now president. Sam Houston was still going to Washington, D.C. As an advocate for the Native Americans and their rights, helping them draft many of these treaties that were utilized to relocate tribes from the land that they previously were on to federally reserved land. So Sam Houston was an ally to the Cherokee, and with that particular admission document allowed him to speak with the Native Americans and as one voice.
Now another part of the collection is this interesting beaded, intricately decorated bag. Is it a bag that you pointed out earlier?
The beaded pouch. The beaded pouch is a wonderful item that we have here in the collection of the Sam Houston Memorial Museum. The pouch was actually given to one of Sam Houston's cousins, and she, as a cousin, at the time lived in Alabama, and her husband was a minister, and they were missionaries to the Alabama tribe. And at that point in time, the Alabama tribe lived in what is now Alabama, between the Tallapoosa River and the Alabama River. And it is a coincidence that Some years later, Sam Houston ends up in Texas advocating for the Cherokee and the Alabama and the KHOU, helping, of course, ultimately the Alabama KHOU tribe to get their land that was certified, I believe, by the state of Texas in mid-1850s, maybe 1855, 1856. So the same individuals that were in Alabama just a few decades before could very easily have been the individuals that were interacting with Sam's cousin. And so this particular pouch that comes through Sam's cousin's genealogical line is a wonderful artifact that we have showcasing the connection between Sam Houston and his family's love of Native Americans.
And one more thing, when you visit the grounds, the museum grounds, is there a part of the museum grounds that's described as Cherokee Hill? Is that correct, or is that the name of it?
Cherokee Hill is a nickname that we have for a portion of the grounds of the museum here at the Sam Houston Memorial Museum. There is an area that we are told by family descendants from family lore that as Sam Houston was serving as a senator in Washington, D.C., while living here in Huntsville, as soon as he was on his journey back, Native Americans would know instinctively that he would be coming back to town, and they would camp just on the outside of the white picket fence area of Sam and Margaret's house, in an area just on the upside of the hill, commonly referred to now as Indian Hill. And these Native Americans would wait for Sam to come back in from Washington, D.C., and the moment that he came back home, they would counsel and they would talk about politics. They'd talk about what's happening on the national level for Native Americans and their rights. And Sam was very much an advocate for Native Americans and their rights on the national level, serving not only as a U.S. Senator at the time period when different pieces of legislation were very critical to Native Americans and their stronghold for their own land and their rights as members of the United States.
Great, excellent. And is the museum currently open?
The Sam Houston Memorial Museum is open. We are open at approximately 75% capacity, although we're not seeing too much foot traffic inside, so we welcome you to come visit with us and learn more about Sam Houston, about his friendship with the Native Americans, about the legacy that he has provided us to be honorable people here and productive citizens for our communities and for the state and for the nation.